This is an emergency broadcast transmission.
Hello, and welcome to the History Channel. We will be discussing the tragic disaster of Krakatoa 535.
Krakatoa's eruption goes down in history, leaving more marks on today's society than one would think.
The first stage of the disaster was the earthquakes preceding the eruption. In 530 to 535, there was a series of earthquakes with magnitude up to 6 on the Richter scale.
In the second half of 534, the quakes were getting up to 1 to 2 per day.
In the weeks leading up to the eruption, the quakes became more and more regular, until, in the last 24 hours, the quakes were 55 per hour.
This is because of the molten magma moving upwards at 30 feet per month. A crack in the plate then caused steam and magma to shoot out like a fountain.
About a week or two later, the second stage begun. The pressure from the magma shattered the chamber, letting seawater in, creating an explosion of steam and magma that shot up 1,500 miles per hour, up to 30 miles.
The shockwave was said to have broken the eardrum of any human or animal in a 15-mile radius.
The shockwave moved at 750 to 1,500 miles per hour.
It destroyed everything in a 20-mile radius and caused fire damage to everything in a 10-mile radius.
Pressured the air so much that it would burst into flames.
From this explosion, a mushroom cloud of ash and debris was flung into the air.
Magma of vaporized seawater and ultra-fine hydrovolcanic ash hurled into the sky, spreading outwards until it cooled and condensed into clouds of ice crystals.
The ice crystals caused sunlight diffraction and cooling over most of Earth. These initial effects affected both hemispheres for 5 to 7 years.
The sun's darkness lasted for 18 months. Each day it shone for about 4 hours, and still this light was only a feeble shadow. The fruits did not ripen, and the wine tasted like sour grapes.
The mushroom cloud, no longer able to sustain its weight, collapses. A pyroclastic flow of boiling, 1,000-foot-tall wave of steam, sulfur, carbon monoxide/dioxide, ash, and rocks is sent in all directions.
Moving at up to 250 miles per hour, it could have spread up to a 40-mile radius.
The chamber of magma is almost void. The chamber collapses, letting the last of the magma come in contact with seawater once again. This would have caused many explosions and even larger pyroclastic flows. After the disaster, the volcano would take weeks to eventually subside.
The sun seems to have lost its wonted light and appears to have a bluish color. We marvel to see no shadows of our bodies at noon, to feel the mighty vigor of the sun's heat wasted into feebleness, and the phenomena which accompanied an eclipse prolonging through almost a whole year. We have had a summer without heat. The crops have been chilled by north winds. The rain is denied.
Now, this didn't just happen because some volcano was angry. No, it happened because of something called tectonic plates. The theory of tectonic plates is that they are a part of the lithosphere. These plates move on top of the asthenosphere. They move being pushed by other plates and magma flow. When they meet, they form 4 different types of boundaries.
The first type of boundary is divergent. Divergent boundaries are when 2 plates are separating because of magma pushing up and pushing the plates apart.
The second type is convergent colliding. This is when the boundary is convergent. That means it is coming together. The colliding part of this boundary is when they meet, and neither subduct, so the crust gets pushed upwards and outwards, creating mountain regions.
The third type of boundary is convergent subduction. This is when the boundary is convergent and one plate subducts under the other instead of colliding. It's very slow for one plate to subduct under the other to be recycled back into the earth.
Transform boundaries are when 2 boundaries are not coming together or moving apart. They are moving 2 different directions and rub against each other while doing so, causing friction to build, and when enough friction is amassed, an earthquake is created.
Volcanoes are formed many different ways, especially from the tectonic plate boundaries.
The first is a divergent boundary. They form volcanoes when the plates are separating because molten magma is pushing up from the mantle. As the magma is pushed up, it creates volcanoes. Convergent colliding creates mountains, though convergent subduction boundaries are a different story. When one plate subducts under the other, the plate getting recycled back into the earth melts, giving off heat, creating magma that rises to the surface. The other way volcanoes are created without plate boundaries is called hotspots. Hotspots are places where magma rises up and forms volcanoes. As the plates move, so does the position of the volcanic chain. The longer ago the volcano was formed, the farther it is from the current hotspot. Earthquakes are caused by variations of boundaries. They are simply the built-up friction from the movement that releases into devastating shock waves. They are caused by seismic vibrations and waves. The intensity of an earthquake is measured only on an assessment of the visual effects of an earthquake. The magnitude of an earthquake is the measurement of the amount of energy released by the earthquake. The Mercalli scale measures intensity. Strike-slip faults are vertical fractures where the segments moved horizontally.
Seismographs work by detecting seismic waves. There are two types of waves. One, the P wave, which stands for pressure. Two, the S wave, which stands for secondary. We can detect how long it takes each of these waves to travel by using three different seismographs on the map. We triangulate to find the epicenter. The center of an earthquake is called the hypocenter, which is the focus, whereas the crust directly above is called the epicenter. Seismographs are important for identifying when an earthquake is occurring. Moment magnitude is the total release of energy during an earthquake. A normal fault is a fault in which the two segments of rock are being pulled apart. A reverse fault is created when a hanging wall is pushed over a footwall. Hanging walls and footwalls are the terms for two sides of the fault. An aftershock is a secondary smaller earthquake, but if the aftershock is larger than the main shock, it is considered the main shock, and the previous main shock is redesignated the foreshock. A Benioff zone is a zone created by subduction zones which cause an increase in the probability of earthquakes happening. Liquefaction is when an earthquake weakens the lithosphere.
This results in sand and water mixing, which then results in sinkholes. Tsunamis are another kind of disaster caused by earthquakes and volcanoes. When a shock wave generates really fast, small waves, they move outwards. As they go, the waves slow down and gain tremendous amounts of water.
1957 to 1958 was an international geophysical year. They did this to try and prove the theory of continental drift. They had many reasons to believe this was true. First of all, scientists found same species of plants and animals on separate sides of the ocean. Also, the chemical makeup of rocks on two different continents matched. This leads us to believe that at some point in time, there weren't separate continents. This is also supported by their ability to fit together like puzzle pieces. Also, there is evidence of glaciers being where it is absolutely the wrong climate. We had identified what looked like plate boundaries by means of mid-ocean ridges and trenches. It is also supported by the fact that most earthquakes and volcanoes occur on or near these supposed boundaries. We know plate tectonics exist because of evidence called heat flow. Heat flow is the measured temperatures around the Earth and are used to prove plate tectonics. We know they are created by plate boundaries. When a new crust is created, it is hotter than the older crust that was formed a longer time ago.
Seafloor spreading is caused by divergent boundaries. When the boundary is divergent, magma is pushing up to the surface, creating new crust. Ridges are created by divergent boundaries. When the magma is forming new crust as the plates are spreading, it forms a ridge. Heat flow on these ridges is how we are able to discern what is happening. Scientists took heat measurements in increments around ridges to see the difference in temperatures. They found overall that the higher heat was on or near the ridge and the lower heat was farther away. This is from the newer crust being created by the magma flow, so it is closer to the ridge. The colder crust is farther away because of the plates spreading.
We also looked at heat flow at oceanic trenches, a convergent subduction boundary where the oceanic plate subducts under the continental plate. The heat flow showed that on the oceanic plate, it is colder because of the ocean cooling it down, while the continental plate is warmer. When the oceanic plate subducts, it is pushed under the crust and it hits the mantle. As it melts, magma is created. The magma rises, causing higher temperatures and forms volcanoes.
Magnetism. The poles reverse every 200,000 to 300,000 years. We can tell this happens by the evidence left for us by divergent boundaries. When the magnetism occurs as the crust is being formed, it shows us what position the poles were in when it was being formed. This gives us evidence for magnetism and plate tectonics in the sense it wouldn't have switched without magnetism, and we wouldn't see evidence of the switching if the new crust wasn't continuing forming.
Ring around the rosy, a pocket full of posies. Ashes, ashes, we all fall down.
The plague was most likely triggered by drastic weather. There are options of extreme rainfall and drought. This is because of the populations of rats as spreader of the plague in East Africa. Drought followed by intense rainfall is almost definitely what actually happened. The gerbils and mice were the cause of such a breakout.
Gerbils are territorial, so when their population increases, they spread, and so does the plague. The well-fed mice would have more than double the litter size. These gerbils and mice then spread the plague to rats called Erythanthecus, and those helped the mice spread the disease to Rattus rattus, a black rat, that inhabits human environments. When the fleas contracted the plague, one of their symptoms was a state of permanent starvation. The fleas were so desperate for food, they would jump to and bite anything that moved. Any living thing. This means that as soon as the black rats got fleas that were infected with the plague, the human race would have been infected in days or even hours.
We do not have a confirmed death toll, seeing as most of the information was gathered from ice core data and information orally passed down and written on leaves. All we know is that if it was really the cause for the bubonic plague, that is responsible for at least 25 million deaths.
The Dark Ages begun because of climate. When the weather got really bad after the explosion, it threw the crops and climate.
It threw the world into poverty and death.
Disasters are causes for many of the worst things in human history. They rip down buildings, destroy lives, and leave graveyards the size of cities, containing everyone from men and women to children who have only begun to experience this world. It is important that you are aware of your surroundings and your position in this world. If you live in an earthquake country, make sure you are prepared. This is the end of this week's episode. Krakatoa 535.